Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Venezuela 2040, a vision for bilateral reconstruction, hosted by Global Americans, Foreign Policy Magazine, and the George Washington University Graduate School of Political Management as part of the inaugural America's Forward Forum. Please welcome to the stage Debbie Mucarsel-Powell, Executive Director of the Graduate School of Political Management.
Good evening, everyone. Buenas noches a todos que están aquí con nosotros. It truly is a pleasure to welcome you to my new home here at the Graduate School of Political Management at George Washington University. I was extremely honored to be asked to participate in this America's Forward Forum in the past 2 days. It's such an important and timely conversation. I want to thank Diego Aria from Global Americans for our great partnership and working together, and to Foreign Policy Magazine for participating and sponsoring this event. I have been, over the past 2 days, truly excited and invigorated by the conversations that we have been having over the opportunities that we see in Venezuela. And I know that we have a lot of work ahead, but I really am looking forward to some of the ideas and the discussions that we have had so that we can actually make an impact and have them come to fruition. And the conversations that we have here in Washington, D.C. and across the Americas, unfortunately, are not always as hopeful and as optimistic as the ones that we have had this week. As we continue to watch conflicts unfold across the globe in Venezuela, Iran, Ukraine, and more, leaders are grappling with decisions that will truly last across every facet of society for decades to come. Difficult conversations must take place to ensure that the future is bright, not just for a few on the top, but for all the people of the region. Our leaders have to be equipped with the skills, the knowledge, and the coalitions to tackle these challenges and to have those difficult conversations. And luckily, for all of you, for me, for all of us here tonight, that's exactly what we do here at the Graduate School of Political Management at GW, with forums such as the America's Forward Forum. GSPM is the first and the most prominent school of applied politics, legislative affairs, and public relations that prepares our students to lead not only as change makers, but also to influence and shape the institutions that strengthen our democracy. Our students and our alumni span from elected congressional leaders, our alumni, some of our alumni, and I always say this, but the president of Ecuador, I don't know if you know, Daniel Noboa, graduated from the Graduate School of Political Management. They are senior advisors in federal agencies. They're across the state legislatures. They truly are the ones that are influencing and shaping the policies that we are discussing today. So I am extremely excited that we provide those leaders not just here in Washington, but also across Latin America, and equip them with the tools that they need to make sure that what we are discussing today actually happens in real time. So I encourage you to please go and visit us at gspm.gwu. I have to make that pitch, .edu. And we have some alumni here tonight. We have faculty. If you have any questions, please let us know. But more importantly, I'm extremely excited that we're going to have a lively conversation with one of my friends and past colleagues, Congresswoman Ileana Ross-Layton. Bipartisan conversation, always looking at the both sides. So I welcome you to be, paying attention and give us questions when you need to. Thank you so much.
Please welcome to the stage Diego Area, President and CEO of Global Americans.
Thank you, Debbie. I want to also thank the George Washington University, the Graduate School of Political Management, and of course, Foreign Policy Magazine for this amazing partnership. I will start with something kind of personal. 10 years ago, I was in this university studying in these halls. I'm one of the 8 million Venezuelans who left the country for one reason or another. This university became my launching pad. It helped me understand the city, how to navigate it, how to make a living in this city as well. So tonight is for me a full circle moment, and I'm grateful for that. I want to welcome you all to Venezuela 2040, part of the America's Forward Forum that we're hosting at Global Americans this week. This week, we brought to Washington, D.C., leaders from middle-income countries, ministers from Paraguay, from Panama, representatives from Honduras, private sector from Ecuador, from Bolivia, multilaterals, tech companies. These countries with way fewer resources than Venezuela that have built amazing stuff together, right? And I couldn't stop asking myself this week, what if? Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, the largest gas reserves in South America, 8.4 million diaspora members, credentialed, connected, ready to invest, ready to engage. Venezuela is the Dorado of this century. But we need strong allies. This isn't charity. Venezuela is a strategic imperative for the US. Energy security, critical minerals, migration, democratic governance. A stable Venezuela closes the door to authoritarian influence in this hemisphere. That being said, reconstruction cannot be managed from abroad. It has to be led by Venezuelans. Those who are playing the long game, a game that survives electoral cycles. So, who's in this room today? Venezuelans from the private sector, entrepreneurs who travel from across the Americas here because they are committed with the reconstruction of the country. Also, those like me who left for one reason or another and that are leading companies, leading multilateral organizations, innovating. They are not waiting for permission, they are ready to lead. This room is part of the answer to who builds Venezuela next. Going back to surviving electoral cycles, bipartisan US support and alignment is critical for a sustained US engagement in Venezuela. Today, we have two former members of Congress who represent a shared commitment for a democratic and prosperous country. I leave you with Diana Marrero, Chief Partnership Officer at Foreign Policy Magazine, who will moderate a conversation with Ileana Rosletinen and, again, Debbie Mucarsel-Powell. Please, let's welcome them with a round of applause.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. We're very excited to host this conversation with two former members of Congress from my hometown, from South Florida. And we have two powerhouses here today. They are people who have created many firsts in their careers. They were Ileana Rosletinen, congresista, the first born Cuban to be elected to the U.S. Congress, and Congresswoman, first Ecuadorian to be elected to the U.S. Congress as well. So many firsts. They also share a couple of other shared heritages, advocacy for human rights being one that's very important, especially as it relates to Cuba and to Venezuela, which we're here to talk about today, and Nicaragua, of course. So the U.S.-Venezuela relationship, I think many would say, is at an inflection point. And, it's been shaped by sanctions, by political pressures, cycles of engagement, and there's an opportunity right now that we want to talk about. And so the conditions are changing. Venezuela is no longer where it was just a few years ago. And so, some form of political transition is underway, and that's what we want to talk about today. So we're going to be convening all of you to engage in the conversation, to talk about four dimensions: political conditions for renewed engagement, lessons from the past, institutional reforms needed for building durable confidence, and the economic role of investment in energy and migration. And so with that, I'd like to start with you, Congresswoman Leitinen. As I said, a lot of people are calling this an inflection point in U.S.-Venezuela relations. So looking ahead, how do you see the political dynamics in Washington?
Well, it's a wonderful time. It's just so much can happen. so much good, only good, how did Trump say it? Only good can happen, something, mumbled something. And who knows, who would have ever thought, and don't tell me that you thought it, that we would go to Venezuela, extract Nicolas Maduro and his wife, and now he's in jail in New York. I mean, it's just, don't tell me you thought that that could happen. I can't believe it that it happened. So strange things can happen. I'm very optimistic that even though right now we're in a transaction kind of mode with Venezuela, we get, oil and gas and minerals, and it seems so transactional. No one's talking about freedom for political prisoners and human rights and political parties and elections. We're not there yet, but that we will get there and that's the goal. I'm very optimistic that that will happen. It is also a pivotal time because I'm a Republican, but if history serves us well, it's only been not happening twice in our history. The party in power in the White House is going to lose seats. So maybe the Republicans will not be in power, the Democrats will be in power, and people will say, well, then U.S. policy toward Venezuela will change under Chairman Gregory Meeks as opposed to Chairman Brian Mast. But I think not, because since the founding of our republic, the President of the United States, whoever it is, has really been the person who guides foreign policy. And it's always been the executive branch versus the legislative branch. I don't think that we will undo history. And the President will forge foreign policy. And they may have a lot of detractors in the House and in the Senate, but he's the guy with the bully pulpit, and he's the guy with executive power, and so he will guide it. And I'm optimistic that good things are going to happen.
Congresswoman, I'd like to turn it over to you. Do you think we're moving towards greater continuity, renewed pressure, a different form of engagement? How do you see this moment in time?
So I think something important for everybody to realize is that I think both sides, Republicans and Democrats, we want the same things. We want to make sure that we provide stability for the region, that we ensure that there's freedom and democracy, that we protect human rights, not only in Venezuela, but those are the values that we hold as Americans here, especially in Congress. And I think that most Congress members, whether we're Republicans, Democrats, we agree on those issues. Now, what differs is the method, the execution of those policies, what we would like to see. And from a Democratic standpoint, as a Democrat and talking to some of the Democrats, and I've had conversations with Gregory Meeks, we prefer to have diplomacy being used as a long-term strategy for stability. Because if you have reactive policies that are just trying to oust Maduro, which, by the way, we're all very happy that he's not in power. I don't talk to anyone that disagrees that that was definitely a huge opportunity for Venezuela, for the region, to start going, providing a plan so that we can make that transition into democracy. But we don't have that plan yet. It's not very clear when we're going to see free and fair elections in Venezuela. What are the Venezuelan people, whether the diaspora here in the United States or Venezuelans at home, how are they going to participate to ensure that there's a democratic transition that will provide long-term stability? Because that's what we need for the economy to thrive. Venezuela has always represented an issue that really affects migration to the United States. It's an energy issue. It's a safety issue. And obviously a national security issue for the United States. And so I think that there are a lot of opportunities to work in a bipartisan manner. And what I always say is that we cannot politicize the issue, foreign policy issues, or the issue of Venezuela, because we really need to work together to provide that long-term stability for that country, but also here in the United States.
I guess some would argue that our U.S. policies have been inconsistent towards Venezuela. I'd like to start with you. Others have said, it's been very consistent for 2 decades. How do you see it? It hasn't necessarily delivered results, real tangible results to date. Do you think it's a lack of strategy? Do you think, why have we been unable to achieve our goals.
There are several things happening, and it was surprising to me, Liana, when I was first elected. A lot of members of Congress just don't understand the politics in Latin America. They don't understand the history, the realities of the security issues of these narco regimes. And so you have extremes on both sides. The extreme, the hard-handed sanctions to the country, no engagement, or full engagement, supporting the country, providing funding. And that's been one of the reasons that I think we've neglected the region and then just reacted to certain crises. Look, I am very excited to see what comes next for Venezuela. I think that we have a lot of opportunities. As someone that has family in Ecuador, I have family in Venezuela, I worked in this issue for a long time. We need to make this work, because what happens in that country is affecting neighboring countries, Central America, the Caribbean, Cuba. We need to make sure that our alliances are strong, but we can't have a unilateral diplomatic effort or intervention. It can't be the United States dictating what happens in Venezuela. We have to ensure that we bring our allies. And one country that we don't talk about enough is Mexico. And Mexico plays a huge role in the geopolitical balance of power in the hemisphere. And they're partners for the United States, but they also, in some ways, want to protect these regimes in these countries. And so we have to create a policy that's going to be a long-term policy that will continue, not just with this administration, regardless of who the president is, which is one of the questions that you asked. So I think the way that policy will work is to ensure a bipartisan framework.
Speaking of bipartisanship, from your perspective, I know you were on the House Foreign Relations Committee for a long time, Foreign Affairs Committee, and you did support sanctions. Can you talk a little bit about that and what other tools you think are at our disposal at this point?
Well, Debbie and I served together on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I couldn't agree more strongly with what she's saying about the need for bipartisanship. Right now, we don't see it very much in evidence. I think when we were there, we saw it a little bit more, because now the margins are so tight. The Republicans have two more members than the Democrats, and when the Democrats, if and when they take over, they'll probably have a very slim majority unless they get that wave that we're always expecting from one party or the other. But bipartisan is the way to guide our foreign policy. But I think that's the magic question: is what works? Is it sanctions? Is it diplomacy? Is it a mixture? I mean, Donald Trump took action in Venezuela. He went at it alone, and it's been successful, but very transactional. What will he do regarding Cuba? We have high hopes. Debbie and I are not only served together in Congress, but we're also neighbors. We live just a few blocks away from each other in Miami, and we know that Venezuela, for our community, is a domestic issue. And we know that freedom for Cuba is a domestic issue. It's not foreign policy. So our community is filled with secretaries of state. It's not just Marco Rubio. We're all secretaries of state, and everyone has a different idea of how to. We all want the same thing. I agree with Deb. We want democracy, freedom, human rights, political parties, free expression, independent judiciary. I mean, you name it. That is what we want, and we want that for all people throughout the world. How to get there, and I think it is that mixture of sanctions, but in the U.S. Congress, I don't know that we'll get a lot of bipartisanship, because Latin America is so often overlooked, as you know, and now they're paying a lot of attention to what's going on in Iran, rightfully so. How much attention is the need for democracy in Latin America getting? And so I hope that whoever's in charge, whoever has the gavel, will pay attention to that, and that we will guide our foreign policy through a bipartisan channel. That's the only way to get it to work.
I'm glad you mentioned the diaspora, because South Florida is home to several 100,000 Venezuelans. Some say 300,000 to 500,000. Incredible community. For those of us in South Florida, West Venezuela and Dorazuela.
Because she's a Hialeah girl, so we're all here from South Florida. We know this community well.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about, what the diaspora can do, what that
The diaspora plays such a pivotal role. First of all, in accepting or not accepting what is going on. I think that any administration and any member of Congress would listen. When Debbie and I served in Congress, we listened to what your constituents want. And if we see that Venezuela still continues, 2 years on with this transactional oil, gas, minerals, and no movement toward democracy, I think people will be upset. I have faith in the Trump administration. I have faith in Secretary Rubio. So I think that we're going to be guided in the right way. And I have faith in Congress, no matter who holds the gavel, that they know that America stands for the right things. And the diaspora has an outsized role in that. In our Cuban-American community, Ecuadorian community, Venezuelan community, oh my gosh, if we don't see that this policy is working, people will protest. And I think the powers that be here, whoever they are, they will pay attention. But right now, they're cautiously optimistic that things are moving in the right direction. How long that patience will last, we don't know. And do we want to accept the Venezuela model for Cuba? I think not, but the community will decide. And I think that the president and the members of Congress will listen. We've got people like Mario Diaz-Balart, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I mean, these are folks who really understand Venezuela and Cuba, and they're driving the agenda.
Debbie, I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of, the diaspora community being a source of strength, but also sometimes creating obstacles potentially to change, and maybe having ideas that might not be grounded in the reality on the ground at this moment in those countries. Just curious how you see that dynamic.
Yeah, I've spoken to so many members of the diaspora in South Florida when I was in Congress, after I was in Congress, and part of the issue that I've seen is that they can be somewhat divided. I mean, they all want freedom for Venezuela, but the groups have become highly political, very active, which is why, by the way, right now the United States is paying attention to Venezuela, why Maduro has been ousted. That came from the pressure of the Venezuelan diaspora, and I want to credit the people of Venezuela for doing that. They are the ones, like Ileana said, that have been speaking up. A lot of Venezuelans in Florida, as you know, have temporary protected status, and their issue is, I can't go back to Venezuela right now. I need to make sure that I remain here legally. And so that's been another piece of the conversation that we're not hearing enough of. And as you know, TPS has been removed for many that were holding it. And that's been the mission of many Venezuelans here. I think them not understanding fully the dynamics of the politics of Venezuela can hurt the Venezuelan issue. Here, domestically in Washington, D.C., like I said, a lot of members of Congress, some from my side, but I think also Republicans, because I remember talking to Republicans about this, they don't understand how important it is for us to have stability in this country. They don't understand the history. And if Venezuelans are not unified with one voice in Congress, it can hurt the long-term policies that are adopted by Congress.
I'd love for you to delve into that a little bit more in terms of why Venezuela really matters to the U.S. Because I think a lot of Americans, especially outside of D.C. and outside of South Florida, may not really understand, what's at stake.
So part of the problem that you all know, I mean, I know that a lot of you are Venezuelans, is that we neglected Venezuela for many years. I remember, Caracas was the mecca of Latin America in the 90s. I went to Venezuela many times. I had a Venezuelan boyfriend, by the way. That's not the only reason why I went, but so I saw the country, at its peak, the city when it was thriving, right before Chavez. And then as Chavez took over, I started seeing the erosion of the institutions, right? The state takeover of some of these private enterprises. And as we neglected the country, the institutions started falling apart. And I think that as much pressure as we've put through sanctions, Americans underestimate the power of an authoritarian regime when there are no institutions in place. When you let the executive and then take over and become a dictator, a very dangerous dictator. So what happened? We placed sanctions in Venezuela. What happened? They start forming alliances with our adversaries. They opened the door to Iran. They opened the door to Russia, Cuba. They started forming those alliances that are extremely dangerous for our national security here. We saw millions of Venezuelans flee. We now have hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans that have come to the United States. And then, of course, it's a political issue. Migration has been a political hot topic. The narco trafficking that has flown, the drug, this organized crime that has flown through Venezuela because they're connected to these organized crime networks. So, I mean, I can go on and on and on. It doesn't just stay in Venezuela. It comes directly and it flows into the United States. And that's why I think Americans need to understand that there's a reason why we have to pay attention to Venezuela and to other countries in the region.
Anything you wanted to add?
Well, and other countries are paying attention, and I think that's why the Trump administration has real power about what will happen in Cuba, because there have been conversations. I'm not privy to it. I just know what I read and see in the media, where Trump administration officials have met with Cuban leaders who have destroying the country and destroyed the country, as you know. And they say, if you think that this can't happen to you, like we did with Maduro, think again. And I think maybe there will be a reckoning. Maybe there will be some movement toward democracy. I don't think so. Once a dictator, always a dictator. You just can't make them into Democrats overnight. And that Venezuela model, copied in Cuba, I think is going to make our community nervous. But I'm optimistic with our diaspora, with our Cuban exile community, and Colombia. Look at the elections and what will happen there. I mean, Latin America has got a lot of potential to be real friends and allies with the United States, and those country leaders are paying attention to what the U.S. is doing, because we are flexing our muscle. And these autocratic regimes better, like the one in my native homeland of Cuba, better take notice. So maybe they'll wake up and smell a cafecito, or maybe they won't, but they should.
So fast forward about 10 years from now, what do you think needs to happen today to ensure that Venezuela has a real shot at democracy, at economic stability, at thriving again, as you described in the 90s?
We have to take those steps, and we have to say, look, it's more than gas and minerals and all of these natural riches that are found in Latin America. That will be the foundation for getting to a democratic transition. But we need to establish that is our goal. And I don't think that we talk often enough that is, Marco Rubio has a 3-point plan, 3 phases of how to get to democracy, but the press doesn't seem to pick up that word democracy very much. But he does talk about it, but they're still just talking about, press picks up, the money signs in Venezuela. I think that the best resource is the Venezuelan people, more than the gas and more than the minerals. I mean, that is, and in Cuba as well, in my native homeland, it's the people of Cuba who matter the most. And sometimes our colleagues would say, well, if they really hated that regime, why don't they just overthrow the regime? And I'm thinking, these regimes have the military, they have the police force, they have everything. And the people have gone out and protested, and they've been arrested, and they've been killed, or they've been exiled, forcefully exiled. So we say they do protest, but it's very hard to defeat an autocratic regime with just protest. So that's why I'm glad that America is flexing its muscle.
Last question for you, Debbie. Just kind of the same question, but flipped a little bit on its head. What are some of the mistakes that we need to avoid so that 10 years from now we're talking about a different story?
We need to have transparency in the plan. We need to ensure and do everything in our power right now. There's an opportunity and we can't miss this opportunity to ensure that we have fair and free elections. There can't be stability in Venezuela if we don't have a strong judicial system, a protection of independent journalism, a protection of the media. We need to release the political prisoners. We need to ensure that Venezuelans feel safe to return. I speak to too many Venezuelans that tell me, I'm not going back. Delcy Rodriguez is still there. It's not safe for me to go back. We need to create an environment where using our alliances and working with other countries in the region, we have to ensure that we have a step towards fair, democratic elections. I think that would send a huge signal to Venezuelans here, to the world, that what we're doing in the United States is working, that there is a path, that the plan is working. But I think transparency is really important here.
And we have to show that Maria Corina and Edmundo and all of those leaders are able to go back. That will send a powerful signal.
Well, I think we're at time, so thank you very much, Debbie and Eliana, for your time and for your leadership, and especially for having this bipartisan conversation, which is rare in Washington these days. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
For the next panel, Venezuela's New Investment Frontier, please welcome our moderator, Tony Frangie Mawad, Director of Ecosistema.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. And thanks to George Washington University, Global Americans, and Foreign Policy Magazine for hosting this event with some Venezuelans that I deeply admire and that I feel represent a more prettier side of our story than the one that's usually told. So I would like to introduce, first of all, Vero Ruiz del Viso. Vero, for those of you who don't know her, is one of the leading minds on communications and marketing in Venezuela. She's been a friend for a while, and she currently works in Working on Solutions, which is her communication agency that works with Venezuela and Latin America. We have, of course, Alberto Folmer, who leads Santa Teresa, our flagship rum company from Venezuela. Diego Salas, who is the Chief Financial Officer at Yomi, which is one of the leading startups in Venezuela. It's based on transportation and delivery. He also works with venture capital that focus on Venezuelan startups. And of course, Angel Cardenas, who is the General Manager for Infrastructure at CAF, which is the Development Bank for Latin America. So thank you all for being here and to discuss Venezuela's new investment frontier through a optic of the private sector. So when we talk about Venezuela, especially since January, the conversation seems to be focused on oil and more oil. And sometimes we tend to forget that the country has huge possibilities in other sectors and areas. So I would like today to talk with people that are working with those areas and are showing, the dimensions and frontiers that are open beyond hydrocarbons and energy. So I would like to start with Vero because she has to leave because her daughter is graduating high school tomorrow. And Vero, my question for you is that you work both within Venezuela and outside, which implies working with Venezuelans inside Venezuela and outside Venezuela, since actually many of the people that work with you abroad in Miami are Venezuelans. So my question to you would be, working with so many Venezuelans, working with Venezuelan companies, also educating literally tens of thousands of Venezuelans through your workshops and boot camps, how would you describe the current state of human capital in Venezuela and in its diaspora? Sometimes it seems that many people tend to forget that inside Venezuela, there's actually a lot of professionals. There's still a large professional class. So I would like to hear about your experience with professional Venezuelans within and outside. How could they benefit the private sector, of course, the upcoming economy, and how can the diaspora insert itself? And if you think there's, big deficits in human capital, or there's actually possibilities or potentialities in that human capital that we have?
No, I think one of the most amazing thing that Venezuela has is their people and their talent. In terms of innovation and digital transformation, I think Diego's going to be at the same page as me. Venezuela has been always since the very beginning of the digital transformation, social media platforms, apps, a market very willing to explore digital platforms, new ways of communication. That's why my company started in a very early stage of social. So in terms of capacity of innovate or creative way to create things or resolution of problems, or in terms, of course, of education and formal education, I think Venezuela is one of the top, even though that we have faced a lot of crisis in terms of economics and politics, but the crisis is not the same as the capacity of the people. The people has been the one that put our country in. The reason that there's food is because a lot of businessmen and women has been facing the crisis and looking for solution, even though you need to be very creative in terms of find those solutions. So when I hire people outside the country, for example, we work with Bancolombia. Bancolombia is one of the biggest banks in Colombia. It's one of my main clients. And all our team is Venezuelans, creating ideas, creating ways to connect with the market of Colombia. We're working very hard right now with the World Cup because Bancolombia is one of the sponsors. And I always decide that, okay, if there's a Venezuelan in Colombia that we can hire, let's hire them because they know how to look for another ways to solve problems. They are always willing to put the extra mile for the client in order that they could be fulfilled. So I was 3 years ago in Israel with a trip with the World Economic Forum. And when I was there, one of the most impressive things that all the Israelis were always talking about is that Israel exists and Tel Aviv like it is, and all the innovation in that country happens because of the people. They say that the main resource is the people. And when I heard that in Israel, I thought like that happens the same with the Venezuelans. Like Venezuelans outside the country or inside the country, for me, is the same. I know that some of the Venezuelans outside may be thinking, oh, no, but I'm studying in Stanford, and maybe someone in a university in Venezuela is not the same. No, I'm here to say that it's almost the same. People on la Universidad Católica Andrés Bello, on la Universidad Central, la Universidad Metropolitana, they're looking for ways to innovate and be connecting always the digital transformation, the new ways of do things with the Venezuelan market. And that is because the professors are very committed with innovation, because the institutions in education are very committed. But what is missing is the capacity to create more projects. And it's not because of the people, it's because of the economy. So I think we have the people, we need resources, and I think that the bridge between the diaspora and the Venezuelan people is going to be amazing when those resources start moving between those markets.
Thank you, Vero. And continuing on that topic of Venezuelan resilience and Venezuelans' way of fixing stuff, I want to talk with Diego about your experience with the Venezuelan tech sector. So in the last year, we've seen the rise of literally hundreds of Venezuelan startups, not because of the crisis or after the crisis, but as during it. And parts of these startups have been recently described as, by Andrés Bilbao, who leads one of the biggest startups in Latin America, as a school for Latin America to learn how to grow in the most difficult conditions. So would you say that the real asset of the Venezuelan tech market and sector is the method and the ability of the people behind?
I think that's one aspect. I've always said, and for us it's definitely true at Yomi, that if we are able to build such a large business with such scale, with such social impact, with parity of features, with every single app in the world, with 80 engineers fully focused on Venezuela, like if we can do that in a really complex place, then why wouldn't we be able to do that anywhere else, right? And so I do think resilience is important. I think doing a lot with a little is important. I think being comfortable with uncertainty is really important. And, we live it day in and day out, right? We build products that we don't know if we're going to launch because of regulation or because of, we don't know how the market's going to react. Sometimes we work, 3 months on a product, we launch it, and then we just pull it back because it didn't work, right? So testing and iterating. And I think that's what makes, Venezuelans really successful at everything we do, right? We've been resilient for so long. And that's taught us that, like we need to try things and we just need to iterate because, as I like to put it, and this is more learned from the US, I love failure. And then people tell me, what do you mean you love failure? I think people that fail or that have had harsh experiences tend to, at some point, be more successful because what you can do is learn from those experiences and come back stronger. And I think that's what a Venezuelan entrepreneur does in general. And I think that's Venezuelans building anywhere in the world, but I also think it's very true in Venezuela.
Thank you, Diego. And now I'm going to talk with Alberto. Rum Santa Teresa has gone from just being a rum company to a whole model in Venezuela with the hacienda that you can visit, with the Alcatraz project that has given, a second labor life to former people that were involved in gangs, with a whole dimension. You even have a music festival nowadays in Venezuela. So I would like to ask you, do you think that this very specific Venezuelan capitalism that Ron Santa Teresa now represents could be replicable for other companies, or it's just a result of very specific conditions for Santa Teresa, which is, a century-old company in a country where that's extremely rare nowadays?
Well, thank you for the question, and I want to thank George Washington University for having us here today. What a privilege to be talking about Venezuela. I mean, I remember a few years ago coming here to DC, and Venezuela was like, oh, that's like number 35 on the priority list, right? And right now, it's for like 1, and it's great. So to your question, I'll just react. I'll react to that. I don't know if this answer is right or not, but our main raw material was crisis, right? And we developed. Well, we imitated. How do you say that? We copied. I can't remember if it was Churchill's sentence where he said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste," right? And so we put together this crisis protocol. It's called 6 steps, and in those 6 steps, basically it teaches you to embrace. I won't go through the 6 steps. I won't bore people to death with that. But it's basically, as soon as you realize you're in the middle of a crisis, then you embrace it, and you basically, in a disciplined manner, you go in and you apply each one of these 6 steps. Basically, it starts with being 2 steps ahead, which means reading the room or reading the crisis correctly, and then there are some very good sort of ways of taking advantage of that information that keeps you 2 steps ahead and seeing things under scenario planning. And so I think there is a way of replicating that in Venezuela. I think most Venezuelans that have survived have developed their own crisis protocol and basically let's say beat the conditions that were against them. And you can take that, you can extrapolate that to Venezuelans abroad that have had to face their challenges and overcome them and basically come out winning. So I think and bringing that to the situation we have today, I think we're sitting right in front of a gaping opportunity, an amazing, unique, historic opportunity that Venezuela has, thanks to the hardship that we've been through in the last 27 years, basically to take those lessons learned and apply them to the country that we all dream to have. I think that's the big challenge we have now. How do we? I think that's the big challenge. When you talk about replicating that, I think the big question we have to ask ourselves is how do we go from transactional, that transactional mode that the panel before us was talking about. How do we turn it into a strategic, let's say, vision, so we don't mess it up this time, because we are such a resource-rich country that it's so easy to screw it up, and we've screwed it up like every 10 years for the last 50 years, right? So hopefully we don't do it this time.
Thank you, Alberto. And now, Angel, I'm gonna step a bit away from the private sector into the multilateral sector that is like in the middle of all the other sectors in Venezuela. And I would like to ask you, as we've seen with Ron Santa Teresa, with the startup sector, with the service sector, there's a private sector that has thrived and grown in Venezuela despite, one of the, if not the biggest crisis in modern times, an 80% GDP contraction. But it has grown over a decaying layer of logistic infrastructure, of energy infrastructure, of oil infrastructure. And that's something that CAF has dealt with in other countries in the region. So how do you think should be the middle point of encounter between the multilateral sector, the public sector, the private sector in Venezuela to actually rebuild that sort of basic layer that is needed to rebuild the economy? And how do you see CAF's role in it now that it's re-engaging again in Venezuela, where its headquarters are actually located?
Do we have like 45 minutes for that answer? Because that could be a book. First thing, we're not re-engaging. And I think that's pretty important. Our headquarters are in Caracas. We've been there. We have over 300 people. We've been in a relationship with the country, and we have done it, and we'll continue it. Having said that, that intersection that you're mentioning, the private sector and the public sector, and I think even the geopolitical kind of game that's taking place, how do we move forward? I think there are at least 4 ways that we can help the country to move forward. The first one, we keep on working with project preparation. Veronica mentioned that that sometimes what is missing are projects. That also happens at the infrastructure level. You can rehabilitate the infrastructure, but you could also rethink what is the type of pipeline, project pipeline you want, and so for that there are resources and also expertise that could be replicable from other countries to Venezuela, and we're betting on that. We're also doing project transactions or project preparation in terms of not only feasibilities. There's a big conversation about that, and sometimes over compliance, and that's been happening. You can now do businesses in Venezuela, but the truth is that you could kind of like ring fence at some transactions and make it bankable. But for that, you need to structure and you need to work very hard with the different counterparts. And of course, you need to build a risk tolerance for that, but that could happen and multilaterals are there. And, you could structure offshore trusts. You could deploy different guarantee schemes, and, that could bring some influence. And I think the third one, it's more about having the conversation of capacity and capacity building and execution. Because, one of the big challenges is not only to have the projects or to have the financing, but also how do you execute that? And I think there is a great amount of lessons learned throughout the Americas that countries have been able to not only deploy capital, but execute projects. And I think that's our role, not only CAF, the IDB, the World Bank, all the multilaterals have to be there, because not only one would be enough, to have the conversation. And I think my last that you asked about for the infrastructure, it's interesting because the private sector has been able to succeed without having that infrastructure stock, and think about what would happen if you can rehabilitate that infrastructure. And I think that should probably be, as Alberto was mentioning about like the strategic perspective should be today as a country to strengthen and to reinforce that infrastructure deployment as soon as possible, so all the economic opportunities will come back.
Thank you, Angel. Vero, do you still have time for a question? I can start with you. So I would like to make a question for each one of you, and it's that, as I mentioned, the investment conversation in Venezuela seems to be taken hostage by oil. And we don't talk a lot about many other endless possibilities that go from shrimp and blue crab to rum to chocolate to digital services, technology, and hundreds of other possibilities. So I would like to ask you, from your experience, from your context in Venezuela, what would you say are certain sectors, you can be as specific as you want, that are not being talked enough but have a lot of room to grow and a lot of possibility in the coming years in the Venezuela of 2040?
I'm not an expert, but I can tell about the meetings that I has been invited with the WEF or with the IDB or other institutions. And in my case, because I'm very involved with digital transformation, for example, at Davos last year, there was a specific conversation around Argentina and how they are trying to create opportunities in the country, in Argentina, to be a hub for artificial intelligence. So in Venezuela, we have, if we fix in some ways the electricity problem and we start thinking about how we can create a database there, or it could be an amazing hub now with the relationship with the United States, artificial intelligence, of course, could be one of the things. And because I truly believe to be in the early stage of things. I became an entrepreneur because I was in 2009 in the early stage of social media platforms, and that's made me one of the beginners in that sector. So AI, for example, is new in every single country, and how we can grab that opportunity and take the opportunity for us to be one of the countries in Latin America, now that with a strong relationship with the United States, to be in that front. That happens also when I went to study artificial intelligence in Hong Kong, in the Science and Technology University there, and also in Singapore. Singapore was very impressive for me because when I was studying AI there, Singapore create everything around. Like they don't have water. They were importing water from Malaysia. They have one of the biggest and most amazing airports in the region, and they only have one city. So they don't need an airport for inside flights. So when you see how Singapore is always like trying to bring innovation in the new topics because they need to be a great opportunity for their small, super small economy. They don't have oil, they don't have our resources. It's very like, it's an influence for me because I'm thinking like, oh, well, we have a lot of other resources and now we can think of new ones too. And I think we'd have the willingness to do that. And in other sector, I think it will be how we can create more a system that can help the entrepreneurs. And I think that's why Diego is investing in entrepreneurs in Venezuela. Because when we don't have in the banking system for loans or credit cards, then cashier happens. When we don't have any ways to call a taxi in the proper way, in a very easy way as the other countries, Yomi happens. So I think the entrepreneurship environment could be an amazing hub for solutions and for investment. Because when outside of the country they invest in Venezuela, they're investing not in the idea, they're investing in the founders, they're investment in the people who's gonna put that project on. So I believe entrepreneurship and AI could be a possibility for us.
Thank you, Vero. Alberto, what about you?
Well, I was thinking about, thinking of the future, right? If you say what are the three big things that Venezuela is about, apart from rum, of course, is oil, gas, energy. Number one, you've got the geographic location, and you have the rare earths, or the rare minerals. So when you add those three together, well, the location, of course, has to do with mobility. It has to do with mobility north, south, east, west. We're right in the middle of north, south, Atlantic, Pacific, right? And then you've got the Caribbean, so you've got tourism and you've got the nature, right? That's one. The other one has to do with energy. Energy, I can just imagine you could have. How many data centers could you have in Venezuela, and with all the gas that we're burning, right? And then you have the rare earths that what we've done until now is just left the country, not even exported it properly. So the whole thing is how do you develop, how do you transform those minerals and you have refining, and then maybe have chip manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera.
Great, Diego, what about you? Thank you, Alberto.
So the way that I think about this is there was 25 years where there was very, very little investment in Venezuela. And many people think about investments sequentially, right? So in order to get to LTE, you first have to go through 3G, 4G, right? The good thing with Venezuela, we might still be in 3G, but we're going from 3G to hyper fast fiber, right? We don't have to go through the steps in between. What I see is that there's a bunch of gaps for many different companies, both established and new ones that come to fill that gap, that need to do these investments to leapfrog different technologies, right? So for me, I would just keep it simple, right? I do think even within the industries that exist today, we have to go from 1 to 10. We don't have to go through 3, 4, 5, 6. We have to leapfrog.
Great, Diego. Thank you. Angel, what about you?
I tend to think that, people kind of are scared of talking about energy. And I think that's, the economics speaks for itself. Data centers, you have, 200 TCF gas, and you can have probably an upside if you keep exploring of the double of it. You have the water access, you have geography, and you have yes, the infrastructure needs to be revamped, but you have an infrastructure existing. You go to other countries and there are no roads. No, it's not like the road is poor. It's that it just doesn't exist. You need to build 200 or 300 kilometers of roads to connect towns. And I think Venezuela has a good chance of betting on being kind of a powerhouse and, energy-intensive products. And it's not only, hopefully going for the refining for critical minerals, but, exploiting the gas. We're losing about $1 to $1.5 billion because of the gas flaring. That could easily be structured in a different way and taken advantage. We can export gas to Colombia and Trinidad and solve the energy security issue those two countries have. And if we think for the future, we can be an energy corridor between Guyana, Venezuela, Colombia, and connects to Panama, the Panama Canal. So, I think energy is probably one of our best priorities. And again, that would serve a macro perspective as well, macro purpose, because it will bring hard currency. And you could, kind of stabilize more the economy.
Thank you, Angel, and thank you.
I need to go, and I just wanted to say thanks to everyone. I only have one daughter, and she's graduating one day, so.
Bravo, Vero.
Exactly. Bye.
Thank you, Vero. And we actually run out of time, so I wanted to thank you so much for this conversation and for bringing topics that are not usually associated with Venezuela, like data centers and nearshoring, to the conversation, especially here in Washington. So thank you all, and thank you all for coming. And of course, thanks Global America, George Washington University, and Foreign Policy for this forum. Hope to continue this conversation in another moment. Thank you.
For the next panel, The American Business Case for Venezuela, please welcome our moderator, Marianne Scott Dwight, Director of Institutional Investor Services at Strategic Insight Group.
Welcome, or bienvenidos, as we say. So today I have two esteemed panelists. To my left is Alex Granberg, who is chair of Aspect Holdings, involved in private capital and energy and direct investment and other sectors. And then to his left is Ann Milne, who is the managing director of emerging markets research for the Bank of America. She is also involved in the capital markets and with sovereign debt and EM strategy, emerging market strategy. So this has been America's Forward 2040, but we're looking back, as someone said earlier today, that the future is now in 2026. So today with this panel, we want to talk about investment and how investment can be involved and impact Venezuela's reconstruction, how the United States can gain by helping to do so. And I want our panelists to talk about the deployment of capital as well. So first off, and what has to change in Venezuela to encourage or allow investment from American capital?
to encourage investment from American capital? Well, I think right now, if you were to go to Caracas, you would think that there is no need to encourage American capital because the hotels are filled with bankers, lawyers, and oil people. I think some of the conditions, though, that will be necessary are probably progress on the debt restructuring of Venezuela. It's been interesting because the last couple of days we've talked a lot about a lot of different aspects, but very little about the debt situation. I'm based in New York. If I were to have the same meeting in New York, it would have been the opposite. They would have been talking about debt restructuring the whole time, and oil would have been a secondary topic. But I would say in terms of the debt restructuring, there has been progress in the last couple months with some licenses that have been granted by the U.S. government that at least allows conversations, if not negotiations. The amount of debt owed exactly is not known. It's roughly estimated at somewhere between 160 billion and 200 billion. The biggest chunks of it are debt owed by the Republic of Venezuela and PDVSA to foreign creditors, but there's a lot of other debt. There's other companies that have had debt outstanding in the past, bond issues. There's promissory notes that have been issued by various companies, and there's a lot of debt we probably don't know what it is. So typically what would happen is there would be accounting of all of the debt, a reconciliation. The IMF would come and get involved and establish a DSA, what they also call Article 4, and then it would take probably a couple years to come up with a debt negotiation. However, there's already law firms and creditors who want to sort of skip this step and move forward with the debt restructuring. Now, that might not be the wisest thing from a, let's say, a legal technical perspective, but I think it's a very good chance that something like this does go forward and that will actually sort of help free up capital by private investors. What I would also say is I would not be surprised if some of these oil companies, once the conditions are in place in terms of legal protections and infrastructure needs, go ahead and make their own deals anyway with the partners that they're working with, whether it's PDVSA or others. So I think that what the U.S. government can do to help is really help free up, help with this, in additional licenses for debt negotiations, encourage the multilateral agencies, as we've heard throughout the day and in our last panel, help with the infrastructure needs. Electricity is really huge. That could be CAF, IDB, and others. So encourage programs by these agencies and encourage other programs that would allow for infrastructure that would make investment for everyone else much easier.
Thank you very much. Now, Alex, as you talk about companies that are committing real capital, such as your own, what are the non-negotiables that you would need in order to do so, such as property rights or contract enforcement and the like?
Well, let me explain. We consider ourselves certainly an investor, but we're an oil company. So we're wildcatter, we look for new fields. We've gone down to Caracas. We're very interested in exploring for new fields. We think there's a tremendous amount of potential there. I don't think we're certainly able and willing to move forward before a debt restructuring. In fact, I think that the wealth that will come from oil and gas production certainly would make the debt restructuring a lot easier. I would say it's the first step, not the second step in debt restructuring. And even if I were a debt owner, I'd probably prefer to wait until Venezuela is producing a couple of million barrels a day, which it clearly can do pretty readily. The debt should be worth more. But what we need to have is something that the country, I think, is clearly moving toward, which is a clear contract that is an economic contract in world terms that is competitive with other opportunities around the world. And there are a lot of countries which are opening up right now for oil and gas investment. People are looking at places they haven't looked at for quite a few years, like Syria, Libya. A lot of places are trying to attract foreign oil and gas investment. And Venezuela will get more than its share as long as it is willing to allow 25% of the profits of the total pie to be able to flow ultimately to the oil and gas companies. And I think that there's all likelihood that on a business basis that will occur. And then really it's a matter of trust that these contracts will be honored. And I think more important and more fundamental than whether or not there's, some nice looking legal laws that are passed that are then not respected. It's about being able to have confidence that the government understands that respecting contracts is essential to an enormous amount of additional capital that will be attracted to the country, that will affect the prosperity of all the population of Venezuela, first. And secondly, to companies like ours, knowing or believing that the U.S. government is committed long-term to seeing stability and sustainability in Venezuela for contract rights is something that is probably most essential. And that's what gives people the most confidence. U.S. government has put a fleet down there. It's putting its full faith and credit behind what goes on down there. As long as that's a bipartisan understanding, which I think was discussed and addressed in the first session, I think that we as companies would have every right to believe that, that these contracts will be honored.
Those are all some really good points.
Oh, I just want to follow up with Alex. So you think oil companies would be willing to commit capital before a debt restructuring is done?
Oh, absolutely. And we would right away.
Okay. I think that that would be I think that would make the debt holders very happy.
Yeah, absolutely, they should be. But I think we deal with a lot of difficult countries that have debt issues, and as long as we have access to the cash flow that we produce, we're comfortable. I'm honestly a lot more concerned about some of the places that we have tried to operate that have a lot nicer looking laws, but the politics are not well aligned with us. The only place I've ever had anything really taken from me is in New York State.
So in your mind, you're not in a wait and see mode, at least vis-a-vis the debt issue, because you can put in some risk premia or something along that nature.
No, we're not. We have to have a contract whereby we feel like we have confidence in getting access to a portion of the revenues from the oil and gas production that we produce, and that is free from being attacked by past creditors. I mean, certainly that structure has to be in place. But I'm confident that those are arrangements that we can gain confidence in. And we don't have it yet, but I believe that we will.
Right. So in some sectors, there's, and reading a recent article in the Economist, they talked about those who are early on into investing into Venezuela, then they can dictate some other, conditions because they would be the early investors. What is your thoughts? What are your thoughts about that? Either one.
Well, I would say the early investors are probably going to get the higher returns because they take much higher risks. And these tend to be, well, it's very interesting right now. We're at a point that those that are producing oil today are those that have licenses from OFAC. There are 6 of them, and joint ventures with PDVSA. It's Chevron, who's the largest by far. Then you have Eni, you have Repsol, you have Morel and Prom, BP, and Shell. These all have contracts. A lot of other people have MOUs, and they're hoping to convert those into contracts like what Alex is talking about. So those are the ones, we're sort of waiting. You have the ones which are moving forward with production, although even there are some constraints. One, not everyone's getting paid. So that's a big one right now. They're working on solving that problem, but not everyone's getting paid. There needs to be a payment system that's established. You need to have access to foreign exchange or another way to get your money out, many of which are looking at doing it and taking barrels of oil, but you don't always get the barrels of oil you produce. You might get barrels of oil in another part of the country because your oil might be more convenient for, being used as a diluent in another part of the country. So, but I think those that are there the first will have the highest returns, but they also have the highest risk, and they're willing to take that. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Alex.
Well, I'd agree. I mean, I think that there's the opportunity to get the highest returns and also the lowest returns because of the risk.
potential for that. Yeah.
But that said, I don't think anybody's going to get a deal which is crazy. I mean, the
Crazy good or crazy bad?
Crazy good. I mean, crazy bad happens when something gets taken from you. But yeah, there's a pretty limited band in which people expect to get these kind of what percentage of the revenues of the profits and royalties. Pretty well established, especially in mature countries like Venezuela. And that said, there's a tremendous number of different types of opportunities that require flexibility on contract types. Shale, which Venezuela will one day be a multi-million barrel a day producer of shale oil, light shale oil. That requires different contract terms than gas, and then heavy oil, then light oil. And there's a tremendous amount of growth opportunity in each one of those sectors. So I think there has to be flexibility. At the same time, the competition is ultimately going to drive what those terms are. There's less competition at the very beginning, but the bid-ask spread between what's really an acceptable and a good deal term is not ultimately is about 5 or 6 percentage points of the revenues. It's just not that big a delta.
Right, and as Ann said, of course, and you echoed, is the fact if you're an early investor, then you're taking the risk, more of a risk, obviously, when you don't have some of the other institutions in place at the time. So I'm going to kind of turn it to the other side now and kind of talk about how can the United States use the capital markets and its institutions and governance to help build Venezuela's economy, and then what benefits may or may not come from that. And so, Anne, as you talked about, and we talked about the sovereign debt, what role does the U.S. play or not play for U.S. institutions and investors in restructuring that debt?
Well, number one, they have to be willing to allow Venezuela to restructure its debt because that's going to commit some of the financial resources for repayment. I would say in terms of the capital markets, as long as the regulations are in place, the capital markets will come. There's lots of investors who would be very eager to go into Venezuela to lend for credible projects. I think that maybe the area that's the most difficult to think about, but perhaps extremely important, is the non-oil sector. And how do you get the infrastructure in place, electricity in place, roadways in place, revamp the ports? Who's going to be responsible for that? So creating programs or incentives that can help in this case, it would be very critical.
Thank you. And as I understand it today, in Venezuela, the legislature has passed the first part of the bill, the reform bill, in order to open up on the electric grid. So, Alex, in asking the similar question in the sense of what advantages and disadvantages are there in helping to rebuild, Venezuela's economy vis-a-vis, and how that helps any return?
Well, I'd like to add something about a way of thinking about what U.S. government's role is. There's a political risk piece that most countries overcome by gaining trust over long periods of time. Venezuela doesn't have the luxury of having long periods of time to build trust. So the bridge there can certainly come from multilateral lending, because we'll put equity dollars in, but we're not putting debt in. And so an oil and field development, you can find a field, but then you need a lot of capital to develop it. Banks need to be able to come in and do that. And being able to secure that lending, possibly from multilaterals, but the most efficient way, the United States being able to assure that significant amounts of additional debt capital come into the country is I think, from political risk insurance. So that it's not actually lending capital itself, but it would give a vested interest by U.S. government in seeing stability by providing the actual risk insurance. And you think about it from an arbitrage point of view, there's really no better player in the world to offer political risk insurance in Venezuela than the United States government.
And so what does that look like, the political risk insurance to you?
Well, historically, for example, OPEC offers political risk insurance in various different countries. I don't think it's available in Venezuela at this point, but I think that such a product would be one that would open up significant investment floodgates into Venezuela. Because from an oil and gas company point of view, I see this amongst my colleagues that are looking at both small projects and big projects, and there's a tendency to think we're just going to invest in things where we get our money back really fast. But the most important projects for Venezuela are the multi-billion-dollar, for example, LNG projects. That right now, when there's a window in Europe to be able to sell gas, LNG, while Qatar's gas is down, Venezuela ought to be moving fast to secure that market. But that's a big capital investment that people don't have the confidence in. But if you add on some political risk insurance, maybe that pushes it over the edge.
I just want to go back for somebody who might be in this room who's been following Venezuela for a long time. I've followed it since it was investment grade, believe it or not. There was in the past a number of deals done in the oil sector, and they were securitized deal, and they were securitized by the export flows. So I don't think that will be the first step, but that could be something once there is a larger debt restructuring of funding can be securitized by export flows. That would go into an offshore trust. And this was a big way that this was how the upgraders, there were 4 upgraders in Venezuela, this is how they were financed. This is how PDVSA financed or issued many of their bonds. They had a PDVSA financed secured bonds. So that's another option down the road.
Yeah, in talking about the bond and the political risk insurance, you've got that also involves not only corporations and entities to actually engage with that, but also the American voter. And so, how do we we have to then in the U.S. We have to convince, I guess, in a way that this is a long-term investment, as it were. And this is good not only for Venezuela, but also for the U.S. economy. And how do we do that?
I think we heard some persuasive arguments in the first panel about how important it is for the United States of America that Venezuela is strong, prosperous, and a secure location. I think most Americans understand that our neighbors are a very important part of our neighborhood, and that the partnership, as opposed to some kind of different type of relationship, the partnership between Venezuela and the United States is one that's mutually beneficial, and it doesn't need to involve our sending a bunch of money and troops to some, other place around the ocean.
I think those, Alex, you spoke that very well, because I think that looking at it as our neighbor, looking at it as a partnership, that also those things and factors will really encourage some long-term investment, which then with long-term investment comes, the returns, not only to the country itself, but also to those who have helped it along. And do you have any other thoughts on that?
I think the political persuasion is by far the largest one, as you were mentioning. And we've seen this over and over again. We've also seen where there have been guarantees that they've been defaulted on. I can think of a number. Let's just say Argentina comes to first in my mind right now. But that's why it's maintaining good political relationships with the countries.
So now that we've gotten, we're in the future is now, as led off with that, and it's 2026, and we're already thinking of 2040. So the next 12 months, I think, is probably a critical time. And so what do you, each of you, to both of you, is what you think should happen first, or in order to, in the next 12 months, in order to kind of move this forward, so we can also think about 2040?
The next year for us is all about actually establishing confidence in a contract. We'll sign contracts, we'll start investing, we'll start drilling wells, shooting seismic, hopefully. That could all happen in the next 12 months. If that happens, it won't just be us, it'll be quite a few companies. And it kickstarts the oil and gas industry in a big way. And I think that from that, a lot of solutions a lot of other options open, not just with the oil and gas industry and money, but politically and other sectors of the economy.
Yeah, I think it's what I mentioned before. You have a lot of people waiting on the sidelines, signing MOUs. They want to invest, but they need to have certain reforms to the hydrocarbon law, which the Venezuelans have committed to make. You need to have an improved foreign exchange system. You need to have a payment system. You need to have infrastructure. You need to have enough rigs in the country. All of this is being worked on as we're talking right now. And I'm very optimistic that in the next year they'll go a long way. And once you get that oil starting to move, then the money will come in and it'll be much easier to invest in other sectors of the economy.
Well, it seems like there's a lot of work ahead, but it seems like it's a very exciting time, both for Venezuela, those outside of Venezuela, and for the U.S. as well. So look forward to seeing what happens in the next 12 months to 2040. And I want to thank both of you for being a part of this panel and sharing your thoughts and your expertise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you.
Please welcome back to the stage Diego Araya, President and CEO of Global Americans.
Amazing event. Thank you all for coming. I want to thank the Graduate School of Political Management of the George Washington University, Foreign Policy Magazine, and of course my amazing team that made possible what seemed impossible. I want to leave you with one thought. What you heard tonight, the data, the stories, this is only the beginning. Global Americans is all in on Venezuela. We're going to build the road to 2040 with the people in this room, bringing more voices, capital, and more will every single year until it's done. Venezuela is El Dorado of the century. The only question is whether it gets extracted or built. The people in this room have chosen to build it. That's enough to make me hopeful. So thank you for coming and see you very soon.